The basics, creating and querying tables. Firstly, we'll have a look at connecting to the database. Then we'll have a look at creating and removing databases. Now below are some sample statements that we'll be using. Now this is the code that you'll use in SQL in order to interact with your database or your RDBMS, your Relational Database Management System. It's called a SQL statement, and it's comprised of certain keywords that perform certain actions. So we'll have a look at the create database statement, the show statement, the drop statement, which we'll use to remove a database, the use database statement, which you use in SQL in order to tell the RDBMS which database you want to be interacting with. And then we'll have a look at the select database function. Now SQL contains functions that you can use as well, which are sort of predefined, or they perform predefined operations on your database. Then we'll also have a look at creating and deleting tables within a database. So there we'll have a look at the create table statement, the use table statement, showing our tables, and then describing our tables. So let's head over to our MySQL Workbench application, and we'll do some practical examples. If you guys had any problems installing or downloading the different or the applications that we need for this tutorial, that is MySQL and MySQL Workbench, please leave a comment for us in the section below. That is if you're watching this tutorial on YouTube, and we will try and help you as far as we can. Let's go and have a look at some practical examples. So once you open MySQL Workbench, you'll see something like this, depending on the version of MySQL Workbench that you've installed. We then need to make a connection to our MySQL RDBMS. And depending on how the installation went of your MySQL and everything is successful, you'll have a local instance of MySQL on your machine, which will show under this SQL development section. Then double click on that. Out of the box, MySQL will not have a password specified. So if you have not changed that, you probably won't see this on your screen and it won't ask you for a password. In my case, I have specified a password for my MySQL installation. So I'll need to enter that and then press OK. You'll then get taken to the following screen where you can then execute queries. So first we need to create a database that we can work with. And we do that by using the create database statement, followed by the name that we'd like to assign to our database. SQL queries must be terminated with a semicolon. And then there are one or two optional parameters that you can use in the create database statement. One of them is to actually go and check if this database does in fact exist before we create the query. And then in order to execute the query, you can click on one of the icons on the top here, or we can press Ctrl-Shift-Enter. Alright, so down the bottom in our output, we can see that it's giving us a warning message. And it's saying that the database tutormeonline_SQL does in fact exist. So let's execute the query again without the optional parameter if not exists. Ctrl-Shift-Enter to execute your query. Now you can see the difference between the two statements when we do not use the if not exists parameter. Now in the first one where we did use it, we only got a warning message. In the second one where we didn't use it, we actually got an error. So MySQL didn't know that it was supposed to check to see if the database existed before trying to create it. So in the first one, it first checked. It saw that the tutormeonline_SQL was already there. And it then sent back a warning message saying that I can't complete this operation because this database already exists. Now in the second one where we didn't ask it to check if the database existed, it actually went and executed that query without regard for checking whether there was a database already created with that name. And because that database was there and it didn't check beforehand, we then get an error message coming back to us. So this is very important practice. It is optional, the parameter, to add it into your statement, but it's very good practice to do that from the beginning, because when you start creating big queries on large databases, These sort of errors are the kinds of things that can mess things up a bit. So it's good practice to start off doing that from the beginning. Then next we'll have a look at the show databases statement. Now the show databases statement just shows you a list of all the databases you have in your system. So Control-Shift-Enter to execute the query. You can see down here that the query was executed, and then it pops up this window which shows us the output of our query. And when we scroll down, we'll see that tutormeonline_SQL does in fact exist. So let's remove the database, and we do that by using the drop statement. So we'll say drop database and then specify the name of the database that you would like to remove. Drop database also has an optional parameter which you can add, and in this case it will then go and check to see if the database does actually exist. So we'll say if exists tutormeonline_SQL, then it needs to remove it. Control-Shift-Enter to execute the query. Down the bottom here we can see that the query has been executed. Alright, so let's create a database that we can use for practical purposes. So we'll say create database, if not exists, tutormeonline_SQL. Terminate with a semicolon, Control-Shift-Enter. We don't see any errors or any warnings down the bottom here, so we assume that it has been executed properly. Just to check, we can use the show databases query, Control-Shift-Enter. If we scroll down, we can see that the database is in fact there. Now we need to tell MySQL to use a specific database, because without that we will execute a query towards something that is sort of undefined. So we need to tell MySQL that we want to use a specific database. So we type in use followed by the name of the database that we would like to use. Terminate with a semicolon, Control-Shift-Enter. Our query has been executed properly. And then to check which databases we have asked MySQL to use, we can use the select function. Now, a function in MySQL is a predefined operation that will perform some task for you, and it will end with opening and closing parentheses. We'll get into functions later on in the tutorial. But for now, the select database function is useful to know, because if you want to make sure that you have used or have asked MySQL to use a specific database, this is how you would do it. Control-Shift-Enter, and there we can see that it has in fact selected tutormeonline_SQL, so we can now perform queries against that database.